Hi everyone, thank you for joining me. In this video we're going to be making a farm table. I recently got an order for an 8-foot long table and 2 matching benches. It's been a long time since I've made any video, much less a farm table build, so I thought I would go ahead and show you that in my current state. So the reason I guess I'd be making it is I'm making it different place, different tools, different lathe, different methods. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll be starting making some table legs, but while we're making the table legs, we're going to be drying some wood. And the wood is actually already pretty much dry. It's been air dried for years, but this is just a simple box made out of OSB and 2x4s, and it's just sort of a makeshift kiln of mine just to get the wood kind of heated up as a fan in there blowing around. There's enough ventilation around this wood stove where it's getting some fresh air. Just to make an effort to just get some of the moisture out. With these farm tables and the benches, there's no real jointery in the top itself, so if there's any shrinkage, it's going to be very minimal due to the dryness of the wood, but then also it's a tabletop, so it'll just shrink in its width, and the tabletop fasteners are designed to account for that. I've got it's a very nice wood stove, but a little wood stove tucked in there. And then the fan is in the back far corner blowing towards the wood stove, so it's sort of just circulating air. It's aimed up to aim kind of above the wood stove. And then I've got a stack of wood going from here to here, and it's only about that tall, enough to kind of get my project done. So I'm gonna get the wood stove fired up, and then we'll get started turning some table legs. I don't have the best filming angles right now, and there's the sound of the generator, so y'all have to work with me on that. This is the leg I'm turning. It's the same leg that I've been turning for a long time. This customer wanted the same turn profile. So normally I used my duplicator in the past, but that lathe is buried back there. Duplicator's not set up on it, so I'm just turning all these by hand. I'm pretty simple about the way I go about it. If I have a turned leg, I just lay it up on there. I mark out this is the first part of the leg here where the apron board will be mortised and tenon into it. So I'll get that marked out, turn the lathe on. It's probably going a lot faster than it needs to be going right now. And this has got several pulleys. I can adjust the speed. It's totally variable speed. Watch this. So I'm just holding a button that slows the speed down. Speed it up. Speed it up. So I can turn any speed I want. It's really nice, and I can also reverse the rotation of the motor. One thing I like doing is pre-painting my legs before I do any assembly. So I'll just put the leg on the lathe and just paint it right on the lathe, and you can spin it if you want to. Usually I just turn it by hand and paint it. But you can have it on a really low rotation and just hold the brush to it and paint it. But I just rotate it by hand most of the time. Get it up to normal speed for me. Hopefully I don't run out of time on the camera. If I do, I apologize. So I'll talk this through pretty good, I guess. So this is the tool rest right here. This right here will be called a turning blank at the moment, the future leg. So I get it, pretty close, about a 1/4 inch away from the wood is where I'm at. And then I rotate it. The reason you want to rotate it, make sure all 4 corners clear, is because if you don't have this perfectly centered, which I probably don't, I'm not being that picky about it. And then check it after you tighten up too. Sometimes you'll move it, turn it on, be clear. And then the tool I'm going to start out with is, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a skew chisel, looks like sort of a spear point, and it's profiled this way. And I'm going to take that tool, and I just cut that corner just a little bit. That's to where it doesn't splinter off. Usually I use this skew chisel. I have 2 of them. This one has a sharper. Then I'll take a parting tool. I refer to it as the party tool. I'll show you what I do. The reason I use that skew chisel is because of what just happened. Luckily it happened on the right side of the line. You can see where this whole section here just broke out. So I go ahead and I use that the skew chisel to make the initial cut on the corner, then the parting tool to define the whole edge of that cut. And now I'll rough this all to round, and in any sort of big part that breaks off, you don't have to worry about breaking off, because I want to keep these corners established. So I need to go a little deeper with the parting tool, then I'm going to round the whole thing off. I'm going to switch it to a time lapse for that. So this is it to its roughed out stage. There's a couple of the flats still exist, but all that will get worked on in a minute. Oh no, let me go get my, no, I don't need that. It's right here. So I know all my dimensions of my table legs, but I'll show you what I'm doing. So I'm marking out the foot right here. It's 1 3/4 inches. Yeah. And then I'll mark out these. So I'm measuring off of right here out. I'll confirm it. I don't want to do the wrong thing. So I just stick that right up against where I turned with the parting tool. Mark out the first segment and the big bulbous area. It's a very simple leg. Make your lines big enough where you can see them once you turn your lathe on. And I'm not worrying about how perfect the lines are. So I'm going to turn the lathe on. Then I'm going to establish the diameter. I've got calipers here. So this is the size of the foot. So I'll turn this outside to the size of the foot, and then I'll take the parting tool and I will cut down to the diameter where the leg enters the foot. But I am going to establish my size of my foot real quick first with this to where I don't lose that pencil line. This is skew chisel, just a big one. You can use any of them. I like using the big one for doing these radiuses. So that's the foot is turned now. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and just get this closer to its rough size, the diameter of the leg. It's a taper from that dimension, the diameter that I set with the calipers, up to this, well, up to about 1 inch off my first line, then it curves down in there. Still filming. Probably have to go make some space on the camera. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and turn all of the shape up on the top of this leg, and then I'll connect the tapers afterwards. Got to be real careful right now because my tailstock is hanging into the area where this is at. You want to make sure everything's nice and tight. If you hang your tool on something, it can knock the tool rest out, and then the tool rest will hit the wood and blow it out. You got a lot of leeway on farm tables. It can be a little rustic if you need it to be. So I'm going to use the skew chisel to kind of cut the down in between the beads. So there's basically 3 beads: a 1-inch bead, a 4-inch bead, another 1-inch bead, or a 4.5-inch bead, I think is what that is. At least this time. I change it every once in a while. 3.5-inch bead. So 1, 3.5, 1, and then however far it is from here to here, and then this is 1 3/4 inches. And I've got plans for this table if y'all would like to see those as well. They're PDF, you can print them out. So as soon as that bead is established, pretty much I want to move my tailstock away from that in case I have any accidents. So I'm just going to clear it. This makes things a little easier too. You can start using your tailstock to tool rest. Sorry if I said that a couple times. Tool rest is a gauge, meaning kind of it helps control the diameters when you're resting your tool on your finger and you can slide straight across. If you have to have it at an angle, you have to compensate for that. Ran out of space while making that cut, but here's the finished result. I think I had pretty much just finished up this section and was starting to kind of cut into here. So I just define all this. I do most of this with a skew chisel, and I use it like a scraper basically, but I turn it up on edge when I'm doing any of the radius kind of areas, and then a lot of this I'm just using it like a scraper. So I use the skew chisel in all different types of fashions, correct and incorrect. And then I used that to kind of smooth out this entire taper. So give you a shot of it. Sorry, kind of missed out on that last finishing touches, but it was no different doing this than it was kind of getting this into shape, where I used the rough and gouge and then the skew chisel to kind of define it. So you can see how rough it is. Now I'll sand it. So I just use sanding belts. They're usually old worn out sanding belts or sanding belts that I get that don't fit my belt sander. I don't do that on purpose as far as like, accidentally getting the wrong sizes. But if I run across a deal on them, they just work really good because they're really strong because it's not paper on the back. It's like cloth backed. So I move the tool rest out of the way completely to where you don't get hung up on it. And then I do most of my sanding like this. You can do it like this, but you're more likely to have something like that happen versus if you're like this and something happens, it'll shoot your hands back out at you. So keep that in mind. Nice. A little frazzled down there at the bottom, but this is perfect because again, this is getting painted and distressed again. And when I paint them on the lathe, a lot of times I'll paint them and just keep exchanging out new legs for the painting, and then I can stick them back on the lathe and distress them right on the lathe. That's the biggest advantage. The painting is easier on the lathe, but not having to do this on a finished table where I'm using a sander working around underneath the table. When I'm on the lathe, I can just have the sander here and just rotate it, and I can very quickly distress a table leg. And you can do that too. You can pre-paint your aprons, pre-distress them. Usually you get some sort of an issue when you're doing assembly where you need to do some touch-up painting, but you're still so much further ahead in just the ease and speed of pre-painting the parts. Just don't get glue where you don't want, paint where you're gonna end up doing your gluing. Let's take a look at this leg. It's So you can see we've got some missing spots here. That works good for the distressing. You'll just be more careful if you're not wanting a distressed piece in the end. But we're smooth, except for there's some splintered out areas. But again, this looks beautiful with the distressing. And then through TV magic, there's the other legs. I already had 4. I just turned that one just to show y'all how I went about it. The next step on the leg is cutting the mortises. I use a Festool Domino XL for that, 14mm dominoes. But before I cut those, I'm going to prepare the apron boards. These are 2x6s, and I skim them through my planer just to take out the coarser plane marks that come on dimensional lumber. It is a windy day 2. Excuse the wind noise, can't do anything about it. Everything's good with the glue. We'll be getting the wood out of the kiln today. Last night, after that last clip, I went to Lowe's and got my 2x12s. This is what I make my benches out of. And then the apron, more apron material, but I'll use this for the benches. Got some paint for paint. This is what I'm using. Valspar Express Coat. This is about $16 a gallon. That's the current least expensive paint that you can buy. This is just mixed to black. And then I got some Tight Bond premium glue. My normal glue, I had that Ultimate, which I used, but this is my preferred glue for pretty much everything. enough wood for this project and a little extra. Wood stove right here. Fan over there. Fan got a little cockeyed, but doesn't matter. Just needs some air movement to kind of get the heat moving around. Is it a lot of direct heat? Sure, but this is just old air-dried pine. Well, I say old. I bought it about 5 years ago, and it was, you know, brand new, fresh-looking wood. Then I just stacked it wide open to let it age up good. Gives it a little character for these farm tables. So it's kind of long-term kind of thinking and kind of aging out your wood like that. But I know I'd use it anyway. Got all the boards planed. My technique is I wire brush them, and then I decide which side is the top and which side is the bottom. Then I plane the bottom, and I run them all through until only planing one side until I get a smooth face. Then I flip the board, run it through the planer. So when I was planing the boards, I'd gotten to this point. And then when I want to plane the tops, I just turn it just a scooch. And all that does is just starts to skim off a little bit of material. Some of them takes off more, but most of them, it just barely skims off the high spots and leaves the saw marks. To get a nice straight, clean edge that you can glue up, you're gonna have to get the edge of your board jointed. There's a number of ways to do it. You can use a hand plane, so a long hand plane, something like a Stanley 7 or 8, something along those lines. And you'll plane your edge of your board, and you're just trying to keep it 90 degrees to the face and then nice and straight. And there's all different methods of going about that. You can look that up online. The other option would be a jointer. So just a normal floor model type jointer where the edge of the board is passed across the cutter head. That straightens it out and squares the cut. You could also straight edge cut it using a table saw with a known straight edge attached to your board that needs jointing. And then the straight board follows the fence, and then on the outside of that cut, the blade will cut parallel to the straight edge that you attach to it. You can also make yourself a track saw like I'm showing here, a track saw setup with your own circular saw, just probably a plywood track, and you just have to take your time, make sure it's nice and straight, and use your existing circular saw to cut it. This particular one is a Milwaukee track saw, so this one runs off a battery. And I've got a Festool rail here. I also have Festool track saw and a couple other shorter tracks, but this one is long enough to do 8-foot boards. So it's basically a circular saw that can plunge, that is set on top in aluminum extrusion, and it rides on this rail and does a laser beam straight cut. The only thing you really have to make sure is that your saw is actually cutting the board, cutting a nice 90-degree cut on there. It could be angled one way or another, and that could be to do with the condition of your rail. So the little anti-splinter and then the grip foam pad on the underside could be off, and also just something going on with your saw as well if it's not adjusted properly. But I'll make these passes on one edge, just kind of cutting in just on the edge, and then I flip the board around. I make a measurement on each side. Say I measure 5.5 inches, make a mark, 5.5 inches, make a mark, and then set the fence to those marks and cut it. So the first cut joints the board, the second cut does a rip cut. The next step is getting the tabletop glued up, or prepping to have it glued up. All my boards are kind of a little wonky looking when they're just laid here like that. It's because there's some sort of warping going on everything. You know, they're nice and straight from doing the track saw, but one may kind of arch up, one may go down. To get everything lined up nicely and to kind of make the glue up easier, even though it makes the glue up more involved, I take my Festool domino cutter, and I use 8mm dominoes every 2 feet down the length of the table. I start the first one 2 inches in on both ends, and then there's 2 foot spacing. And that's for each joint in the table. So this tabletop is going to have 35 dominoes to get all the boards lined up. You could also use a biscuit joiner. Tongue and groove would work between the boards, or a spline. You could also go underneath and do just put some sort of batten strips and screw up into the tabletop. You're kind of getting outside of the more woodworker details at that point, but that's perfectly fine. That's how I started out, and those tables sold fine, and no one's ever called me with an issue. You just might form gaps between the boards if there's any kind of drying that happens. So it's my least favorite part of the project, but it's not that bad, and it creates a very nice top. So I use a drywall square for doing so. I've made my marks, and I line the square up with the marks, and then I just put a little tick mark that crosses over the joint on every single mark, and then I'll come back with the domino and make all my cuts. Glued up, cleaned up. I'm just going to let it sit outside overnight. It's a little cool, but it's not going to freeze or anything. But it'll be ready to go tomorrow. I will flip it over, belt off the glue on the bottom side, and then start the process of sanding, trimming the edges, easing the edges, and the finishing. Before it gets dark on me, I'm going to go ahead and rough out the leg blanks. For that, I just used dimensional lumber from Lowe's. These are 2x12s. And in this case, I'm cutting them to 15 3/4 inches long. I normally do 16. I've got a reason, it doesn't matter. But 15 3/4 inch long. Go ahead and make sure your first cut, the first end of the 2x12 is square, and then just make your cuts and cut them. I'm using the sliding miter saw. This next step could do for some explanation. So I've taken the miter gauge on my table saw. So this is one off a different table saw, but this one works better than the little teeny one that comes with it. Luckily, this saw has a just normal 3/4 slots in the table for the whatever it is you want to do. You can make a little crosscut sled for this if you want. And that would work great for doing this operation as well. But just screwed a scrap piece of 2x6 to the gauge, just 2 screws through the back, a block clamped right here to act as a stop. And what we're doing is we're cutting the notches in the legs to receive the rails that will run the length of the bench. So the bench design has 3 legs. So you just put the leg in this way and you'll make one cut like this. Then you just rotate, make the cut here. Then after that is done on all the legs, we'll readjust the stop, and then we'll come up there and that completes the cut, and that little block of wood will pop off. So I'll make those cuts and we'll readjust. Just got the bench frames done. My little boy helped me get those put together, and tonight I will paint the frames black, distress them tomorrow, and go ahead and get finish on the seats. My phone messed up in that last clip and didn't film the entire finishing process. I just used an inexpensive brush and a finish similar to Minwax polyacrylic and satin. I mix about 50% water, 50% finish, and then brush it on just fully, quickly, and it looks like it's a mess while you're doing it, but just let it start drying and most of it will even out, and then you can just brush out any areas that look like they're runs or anything like that afterwards. The next step is I drill some holes. These are actually only about a ½ inch deep, just to look like peg joints. If I was doing a normal mortise and tenon joint, I would go ahead and actually do a full peg, but I don't actually want to reduce the strength of the glue surface by drilling a hole this big through the dominoes that are in there. So again, about a ½ inch deep, and I'm just using some 3/8 inch soak dowels. I'm going to hammer them in with a little glue, and then I use a saw just to cut them proud of the surface just a little bit, a 1/4 inch or less. Go ahead.
I helped my dad, and this whole table, I helped my dad, some part of it, these little holes, and I glued boards together.
There's a couple things I forgot to show. One of them being how I attach the bench frames to the seats. So everything's upside down right now. I just do pocket hole screws with a Craig jig, and then pocket hole screw it right into the seat. Just make sure that your screws are the right length to where they don't poke through the top. Good morning, everybody. Let's take a final look at the table. It is done, and I'm about to deliver it to the customer about 2 hours away. All went fairly smooth with this project. The only kind of fix I had to do is one of my bench seats has a slight twist in it, and that transfers to the base. So I just put the bench down in my kitchen where it's really flat, and then I wobble it back and forth and then adjust the legs to get it sitting nice and level. The last thing that I do is before I go to a customer's house, I stop and buy some of the little circle felt pads. They're about the size of quarters, and I put them on the bottoms of the feet of everything. And then what that does is they all squish independently and make sure everything sits custom to the customer's floor. But I get it within just a scooch of being correct, and then the felt pads will make up the difference. You could have this thing on a granite slab that's perfectly flat, but your customer's floor is, or your floor is not going to be flat, so you don't have to obsess with getting it perfect. Here's the bench seats. One little fix that I ended up doing is some of the finish built up in the kind of little knots and recesses in the table, and it stood out as really milky looking, so it did not look good. So I took some little acrylic artist paints and mixed up a darker color and took a brush and just kind of went down in all those, and then I went like that basically, and that took it off all the high spots and then just left just the dark mixed brown that was mixed up pretty close to the knot color down in the knots to take away from that. And that's one of the downsides of using the Minwax polyacrylic style finishes, is it can leave a milky surface if not applied absolutely perfectly. I'll give you a couple views, and I'm gonna try to get some shots of this in location where it's gonna be delivered to. But a very standard table for me. Nothing out of the ordinary. Underneath, so you can see the tabletop fasteners. I get those from McFeely's with these little short screws. They have a head like a pocket hole screw. So that's that. I'm gonna go ahead and do my delivery, and hopefully I'll be able to add some shots onto this.